Hello and welcome to Against the Storm patch 0.49, the Merchant Shipwreck update. In this update, we are going to see some interesting new stuff, especially the event that matches the name of the update, the Merchant Shipwreck Glade event. There are also 8 new deeds, 6 new ghost encounters, 7 new orders, a new language, Thai, and a lot more. So let's just go ahead and jump in. Many of you who are playing the game may have noticed in the last 2 weeks that the game could be crashing more for you. And they did do a couple, at least one, maybe 2, updates over the last 2 weeks to try and fix those crashes. But those are related to the fact that they upgraded their Unity version to a much more recent version, and some changes under the hood that they don't have access to have introduced those crashes. They've put some fixes in that may slow the game performance down a little bit, but should avoid those crashes. So, as always, you can report your crashes to the developers and provide the logs and the info that they need, and hopefully they can use that to help fix the game. So, on top of that, they, of course, last time we had the introduction of the new Foxes race, and we explored that with a little mini-series. On top of that, the game has grown quite a bit in terms of popularity it probably has effect of that. So it's been a busy couple weeks for them, besides working on the updates, but they still have released a pretty significant update. The first thing is, as I mentioned, of course, the new Merchant Ship Glade event. This is what it looks like. It can appear in any glade. There isn't any sort of proximity to the water on the edge of the map or anything like that, because the implication is that either some sort of a tidal wave brought the ship all the way into your island, onto your map, or it was covered in ocean during one of the resets, the blight storm cycle resets at some point in the past, or who knows. So it is there. It is magically there, and it has two possible ways to solve it. The first one is a working effect tied to trading, that has a nasty consequence. It has a nasty consequence if it's not solved. The 2 decisions that you have to make as far as which way you want to solve it are not in the patch notes, so we're going to have to go in and experience it ourselves. They also added some older events, or some options, just new decision choices to some of the older events. So now there are only a few events left without multiple decisions. Specifically, things like the Fishman Totem and the Living Matter, those things that kind of pop up with during an event as like a secondary event, which we'll actually get into Living Matter in just a moment. But first, we can also take a look at a couple of the new ghosts. If I can remember where my button is to advance the slide, there it is. There are new ghosts for a Lizard Elder and a Fox Scout. So we're gonna those are 2 of the new. I think there's 9. Was there 9? 6. 2 of the 6 new ghosts are these 2 here. So we're going to hopefully, if we play Curse of Royal Woodlands, we'll see those. We'll hopefully see those, possibly some others as well from the new selection. So as I mentioned a moment ago, Living Matter is no longer in the game. Its place has been taken by Blood Flowers. They did this because of a few things. One, the Living Matter was tough to see on the ground. It was really tough to see. And also, they were using a particle effect for the visual, for the little bubbling of the blood, I guess is what it was. And it was actually a complex thing on people with slower systems, and they couldn't handle it. So then they had to put in a bypass for it, for weaker systems, slower systems, to allow it to still be there. And so because of that, it was very complicated and complex as far as development goes. So they, and it kind of didn't, I don't know, it's kind of a little bit of an odd thing. So these are the new blood flowers, and these will crop up in the place where living matter used to. So as a response to different types of events, I think they're well, here you can see that they're on the I think they're on one of the fallen soldier, or fallen people events, but they will crop up just like we saw the living matter before, with the same effect, I think. But it looks really cool, that red effect. Let's see, what else is there here? Ah, yes, they also added some UI UX type of improvement here when a recipe is referenced of any kind, whether that's in the screen here on the trading post window or anywhere else in an order. You can mouse over it and you can see which buildings it's made in, and via the blue color of the text, which buildings you have where it can be made, which is really useful as well. So you can kind of see, okay, I can make this thing, especially like with an order, I can make this thing there. Let's go there, set that up, and that way you don't have to remember necessarily where those things are made. Let's see. They also added a huge change to the trade routes, since we're kind of here on the same screen a little bit, or similar screen anyway. Now the trade routes will give you standing credit with that faction or that town based on the amount of amber that the trade is worth, which is really good, especially for those of you who would point out on occasion how I would only ever do one because I didn't really care about, maybe I didn't care about the amber, or I just wasn't thinking about it. But now I do care about the amber more so than I did before, because now the more amber a trade is worth, the more standing I get, which means that doing multiple stacks of a trade means that I can earn more amber and therefore earn more standing, which has really been a complaint of mine since they added the new system. Because why could I not before do a 2 or 3 trade stack with a faction, or a city rather, and get more reputation with them, more standing with them? So now you can. Also, we'll talk about this I think a little bit later too, but when you have cysts, blight rot cysts spawning in your town, and now since they spawn with the use of rainwater, they can spawn during the storm. And in the past, when they spawned open, and you had to go and burn them if you wanted to burn them immediately. Otherwise, they would start raising your blight. Now, if you burn all of the cysts in your town during the storm, and another cyst pops up at the end of the storm, let's say, it doesn't actually open. It doesn't actually become affecting your town at all, whether that's on the corruption scale, nor can you burn it. It's there for the next storm. But if you still have at least one active cyst, then it will open. So you kind of have a place there, which I understand why they made that distinction. In some cases, you may put a couple people in your blight post. You send them out. At the beginning of the storm, they burn, say, 3 cysts in your town. They finish up, and you're a minute into the 2-minute storm. You pull those 2 people out and assign them to another job. Well, then this other cyst pops up, and if you're in a high prestige level or something, that could kill your game right there. So I believe at least that it's there to make sure that you aren't surprised by that cyst. Because if you have a couple people working in a blight post, and you have 3 cysts active, and they haven't finished clearing those 3, and a 4th one pops up, they're just going to go work that 4th one, and you really probably won't even notice. But if a new one pops up after you've pulled your people out, or after they've finished working, then that's going to be more of an impact on a game, especially, like I said, at higher prestige levels. So that makes sense to me. And I guess I just probably explained the whole thing, so we don't need to talk about it later then. Let's see. So we talked about the merchant shipwreck. I'm kind of going through the patch notes here. I'm not going to go through all the new deeds, but they are all tied to the new modifiers that were added into the game a few updates ago. So they're all about winning games near those various modifier tiles. As I mentioned, there are also 6 new ghost encounters. We saw the lizard, elder, and the fox elder. There's also a ghost of a lost scout, ghost of an old merchant, ghost of a murdered trader, and ghost of a tea doctor. And there are also 7 new orders, all of them making use of new objective types introduced in the game. So trade routes with a given minimum value, discovering glades in a short time span, those types of things. Let's see, balance changes. The ghost encounters in the Cursed Royal Woodlands have been rebalanced so that you will get a wider variety of ghosts. You won't see the same ghost over and over again. And you may not even see 2 of the same ghost ever on the same map. Let's see. The Land of Greed modifier has had an effect change, so now it only causes you to focus on your wealth, which means that impatience is going to grow quicker, but trade routes reduce impatience generations. Active trade routes reduce impatience generation speed by 20%. So you can you gain impatience, but if you keep 2 to 3 of those trade routes going all the time, you will actually, if you keep 3 of them going, you actually reverse the effect and actually make it slower than it was before. There are, as I mentioned, there are new decisions on 5 existing Glade events: Corrupted Caravan, Fuming Machinery, Withered Tree, Petrified Tree, and Noxious Machinery. All have 2 choices now. They only had 1 previously. Players now also will make sure, the game will also make sure that players finishing the tutorials are at level 2. What that means is if you skip the tutorials, or if something happens weird and you don't quite make it to level 2 by playing the tutorials, you will be brought up to level 2 at the Blight Storm reset at the end of the tutorials. So that way you are at the same point, roughly speaking, as everyone else who plays through the tutorials if you skip them. Which is actually would have been nice for me, because I skipped the tutorials for the playthrough when we started on Steam, and I started at level 1. Not that level 1 was that long. If you fix the Leaking Cauldron Glade event, it will spawn fertile soil around it. Newcomer scaling has been changed. That is the caravans of newcomers that come once a year, or once every 10 minutes. Previously, the number of people in the caravan was relative to the number of people in your town, which worked out okay and whatnot until you had a major die-off or leaving event during a storm, or any time, but probably during a storm, and let's see, you lost half your population. The newcomer group that comes next is going to be smaller than it would have been had you not lost that population. Which means that you may never be able to recover from that die-off event, because you just don't get enough people to replace the people you lost and to sustain the essentials in your town. So now instead, the newcomer size is relative to the number of years that have passed. The newcomer group size. So the newcomer group at the beginning of year 2, it's going to still be 3 people. But as you progress through your town, you get up to years 6, 7, 8, maybe 10, if you're like me, then you could have some fairly large newcomer groups arriving at your town. I don't know if there's a cap. I don't know if it goes like from 3 to 7 and then stops at 7. They don't say. We'll have to experience that when we play, if we get there, if we get that high. The vitality effect now needs 200 units of complex food instead of 150. So if you have a town with that, make sure you recognize that there's a change there. The trading post is now movable. However, I don't know if it will cost you anything to move it. We'll have to experience that when we load into the game. But it is now movable, which means that I will be willing to build it earlier in the game because I can, assuming it's free to move, because I can just move it later when we expand out further. So those of you who like to yell at me because I build my trading post in years 3 and 4, maybe I'll build it in year 1 from now on. I still have to remember, but at least maybe. As I mentioned, the tooltips now show the building that the players own in bright blue. And that's in all tooltips for any good. So no matter where they appear. So if you are looking at something, you can immediately tell whether you can make that item and where you can make that item. And tooltips now show which service buildings you own when you're looking at a need on a service building, which is really nice too. So you can see actually what buildings it is, not just that you have it. What I would like to see is in that tooltip which buildings make that item, but I guess that would be there also with this change. We'll have to see. That would be really nice to see as well. Can I make the item that this service building sells before I take the service building? That's the piece that I hope that we have gotten as well with this. Holding shift when changing production limits will now change the number by 10. Holding control will change the number by 5. So if you're using the arrows, you can now skip a little bit. I believe that's everything that's new. There are a whole host of bug fixes, a lot of them revolving around, Fox-related stuff, and a couple of other things which were introduced as part of the Fox's update, the Sentinels of the Forest update last time. However, there are 2 new music tracks in the Curse of Royal Woodlands during the storm. As I mentioned earlier, Thai is now an officially supported language. And we have the new look, or the new effect, Blood Flower, where we can now more easily see that there's a thing there. And also, obviously, it replaces that challenging programming that was in for the Living Matter. And finally, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, they have added some more fixes in this update to hopefully fix the CPU crashes. So if you're still getting CPU crashes, make sure that you report those and provide the included or the requested information so that the developers can look at your logs. So that's it for this update. We're going to start a new series Friday at the usual time. If you're watching this immediately upon release, then it'll be tomorrow. Or if you're watching this on Friday morning, it'll be a little later today. So thank you all for joining me for this update, and I will see you all in the series. Thank you for joining me. Bye for now.